Okay.
Okay. Um, this week, technically, Yom Haatzmaut, I think, is Shabbos, this coming Shabbos. And it's observed in Eretz Yisrael because of concern about Chol Shabbos on Thursday. First, I just also want to mention the shir is dedicated in memory of Frank Borg. Frank was a maspalel in my shul, but he was a very close friend, and his yard site is the 5th of Iyar, which is Yom Haatzmaut, and he's somebody I always mentioned. Sometimes when you walk in the shul and people who aren't there for a number of years, after a number of years, you don't look at their seat or whatever it is. Frank is one of those people that when we walk in, even though it's in many years since he passed away already, you look at the seat. His memory, he's still there. And so his yard site it's his name, Ephraim ben Moshe. His yard site is this Shabbos. He was a good friend, very devoted to the community, devoted to the shul, and I just want to dedicate the shir in his memory. This Shabbos is Yom Haatzmaut, Israeli Independence Day, and the decision was made, I guess, early on, that when Yom Haatzmaut falls out on Shabbos or on Friday, whatever it might be, which might lead to Chol Shabbos because of the parades that take place, whatever it is that takes place, to observe Yom Haatzmaut on Thursday, or in certain situations, postpone it, whatever it is, but it shouldn't be a cause of Chil Shabbos. And the one who perhaps was the moving force for this attitude was Rav Goren, who was the chief rabbi of the Israeli army at that time and later became the chief rabbi of Israel. And he's a person who had many accomplishments. He's probably responsible for kosher food in the Israeli army. And he had an influence in a time when there was a negative attitude towards religion in the official positions in the state of Israel. He somehow was able to establish a relationship with many of the secular leaders. I read that he wrote that actually the decision that he made regarding changing the date for the observance when it's close to Shabbos is a decision that he regrets making. And the reason for it is because at that time, the attitude was, let's take the religious observance, those who say Hallel, or who observe it in some form of a ritualistic manner. And those who observe it with attending parades and all kinds of parties that are made. So they wanted to keep these two different approaches, which do not necessarily contradict each other, but they wanted to keep them together as one day. And of course, there was this fear that if they would observe it from a religious perspective in a ritualistic manner on Shabbos, they would have the parades on Shabbos, and it would lead to Chilul Shabbos. And because of this, the decision was made. I think they used as a foundation for it the different dates that were used before Chasimus Talmud for reading the Megillah, and in Yerushalayim when Purim falls out in Iyar Mukav Choma on Shabbos. They read the Megillah on Friday. So they wanted to apply the same logic to Yom Haatzmaut, and because of this, he had suggested, and it was on the basis of his psak, that they decided to say Hallel, let's say this year, when Yom Haatzmaut falls on Shabbos, they say it on Thursday. Now, but after a number of years, he apparently, according to what I read, he regretted making that decision, and his feeling was that there should be a separation between the secular celebration and the religious celebration when Yom Haatzmaut, when the 5th of Iyar falls out in Shabbos. And he felt that keeping the two together in a manner that, because of the concern of how the secular celebration will take place, Yom Haatzmaut will have a secular identity. And his feeling, what I read, again, I didn't hear it from him, but I read that he said that in the situation that exists this year, his preference would have been that, looking back, would have been to observe Yom Haatzmaut in a ritual manner, whether it's saying Hallel or saying Tehillim, or whichever way it's observed, would have been to keep it on Shabbos, and the parades should be on Thursday. He felt that perhaps that would have given Yom Haatzmaut a greater religious identity. And to a certain degree, I think that he was correct, because more and more the observance of Yom Haatzmaut, I think, as opposed, by the way, to Yom Yerushalayim, I think, is seen to a certain degree similar to July 4th in the United States. And I think instead of Sudas Haudah, a day of giving thanks to HaKadosh Baruch, a meal, making a special meal, giving thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because the victory of the Jewish people in the War of Independence was a victory of Mimavas L'chaim. One looks how the Arab nations fight among themselves, kill their own. I'll discuss it later on. But certainly looking retrospectively, we see that not that there weren't religious problems, there are religious concerns, but we see that had there not been a state of Israel, the Jewish people would have suffered loss of life, and the Jewish people, and from a religious perspective, the Torah world that was built up in Israel would never have taken hold. I'm not being critical of those who thought years ago differently. We don't have Nevi'im, we don't have prophets, but we can look back. And I would like to discuss that also a little bit later on. Now, when the state of Israel was established, there was great hesitation among the religious crowd, among many in the religious crowd, I take that back, among many in the religious crowd, as to what our attitude should be regarding the establishment of the Jewish state. There were those that were opposed to the establishment of the Jewish state because of the Gemara in Ksuvos, how God imposed Shavuos, oaths, on the Jewish people, Shelo Yalu B'choma, that not to organize an army and to invade and to conquer the land of Israel, and Shelo Yimradu Bo Musolam, and not to rebel against the nations of the world. But there were those who responded that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, according to Gemara in Ksuvos, and my father would advocate this, and I saw it also in the name of Rav Herzog, who was the chief rabbi of Israel at the time of its independence, that God imposed a shvuah on the Umos Olam, Shelo Yishtabdu es Yisrael Yosem Midai, that they should not treat the Jewish people too harshly. And they certainly violated their shvuah. They violated their oath. Where were the nations of the world during World War II? We see today how they're speaking up on behalf of the murderers of Gaza. They try to paint pictures of being motivated by humanity. And they accused the Jewish people of what they did. So no attempts were made. And even when the Allies were fighting the Nazis, no attempts were made to hinder the efforts of the Nazis to bomb the rails where the railroads were going to the concentration camps to kill the Jewish people. No attempts were made. In a sense, they allowed their own enemies. They fought them on every level, except when it came to the Jewish people. And now these people, you have to listen sometimes to a session at the UN, how European countries malign Israel. So the nations of the world, to a large degree, violated their oath. And the halachas brought down that when two oaths are given jointly to two parties, one oath dependent upon the other, then the Jewish people have a right, are relieved from their responsibility of the oath. However, there were those who felt, and I might even add the word sincerely, based on the perception that they had at that time, that one, it was not in the interest of the Jewish people at that time to have a state of Israel. And two, to support their claim, they also mentioned this Gemara. But a number of these people, some of them great Gedolei Yisrael, great leaders among the Jewish people, after the state of Israel was established, at that point in history, I don't know that there was a change in their attitude about the past, but there certainly was a change about their attitude in the future, that once there is a state of Israel, Israel has the right and even the obligation to fight in its own defense. But there were those who maintained that the Gemara in Ksuvos of Shelo Yimratu B'umas Olam and Shelo Yalu B'choma remained a factor even after the establishment of the state, since it was established in a manner that they felt was not halachically oriented or proper. Most notably, it was I would say that the leader of that group was the Satmar Rebbe, and to a certain degree, part of the argument was because the leadership of the state of Israel was not religious, was not religiously oriented, and to a certain degree, their claim was that they were anti-religious. And there were probably many of those in the government who did have that orientation. They felt that there has to be a new approach to a Jewish state. And these people, unfortunately, as time passed, not only they wanted a different approach to a Jewish state, but some of them probably would have wanted the state to cease to be a Jewish state, but just to be a political state that will serve Jews and non-Jews alike. But the Satmar, I remember after the 6-Day War, when I was a student in high school at the time, and there was great fear and great trepidation about what is going to happen in Israel. When Nasser shut down the Bay of Aqaba, and he talked about throwing all the Jews into the sea, and he had the support at that time of the Soviet Union. And what I heard at that time, that Israel was expecting so many casualties. They were even digging up graves in the courtyard of schools. Whether it's true or not, I don't know, but I remember hearing that. And then
We read that they were Makdish public parks to be basic boroughs.
That's right. Yeah. I heard about schools.
It's the same thing.
Yeah. Okay. And then there was the miraculous victory where Yerushalayim was returned to the Jews, Hebron was returned to the Jews, and great areas of Eretz Yisrael were returned to the Jewish people. And of course, at that time, there was a suggestion made that we could make peace with, and this suggestion was not only by politicians, but some rabbis also at that time suggested that we give back many areas of Eretz Yisrael. And this battle, this ongoing conflict continued. And of course, there was the Yom Kippur War. And an effort was made to have what they called land for peace. And in certain areas, that in a limited way, that might have worked. But there were certain areas, let's say take Gaza, that when they gave it back, the leadership of Gaza made it very clear that they have no intention of being at peace with Israel. They made it very clear that to their last breath, they were going to destroy this. They're going to try to destroy the state of Israel. And foolishly, without getting anything in return, not even an oral commitment, Gaza was given back to those who are determined to destroy the state of Israel and to annihilate the Jewish people that are there. And don't think that it's only limited to the state of Israel. We see what's happening on the college campuses. Students, Jewish students, who had no affiliation with Zionism or Israel till now, are attacked, are not allowed to go to class. And when you mention it to the leaders of the university, they'll tell you that they are opposed to anti-Semitism. And about the situation in their campuses, they will appoint a committee to look into it. I am sure that during World War II, there were many, many committees appointed. And what is more troubling is there are people who try to identify themselves as being Jewish based on their genetic makeup. Leaders of the universities on one hand, and people involved in very religious groups on the other hand, who joined forces with the murderers of the Jewish people and joined them in their protests, and at the very least enable them to act towards the Jewish students the way they do. So the nations of the world, the UN, they acted in a manner that showed oppression of the Jewish people, and especially of those Jews in Eretz Yisrael. And they were Mishtabed Yisrael Yosemidai. So the Jewish people were permitted to go to war because the Shvuah was no longer valid, because it was dependent upon them. But as I mentioned, those that say that once the state was established, in addition, once the state was established, it was irrelevant anyway. Now, the reason given by many in the opposition was because the leadership of the state of Israel was not religious and was somewhat anti-religious. I've mentioned that. Now, the Rambam in Hilchos Chanukah, when he talks about why Hanukkah was established as a holiday to give thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Rambam, Perek Gimel, Halach Aleph, he talks about the oppression that the Syrian Greeks did against the Jewish people, that they did not let them observe Torah and mitzvahs, that the economic oppression, the moral oppression, And then until HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed mercy for the Jewish people, and as a result, and God saved them, and they established a king for the Kohanim and Malchus Yisrael, control, governing of the Jewish people by the Jewish people, was returned to the land of Israel for more than 200 years until the second Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. So in discussing the reason for the holiday of Hanukkah, and in discussing the reason for the saying of Hallel and Hanukkah, of giving praise and thanks to God, the Rambam doesn't just mention the victory of the Maccabees, but he talks about what happened for 200 years afterwards. That is part of the reason of the celebration. And we know that during those 200 years, there were kings of Israel, some who were Jewish and some who halachically were considered avodim, but some of them were very oppressive against the observance of Torah, against the observance of mitzvos. And nevertheless, because there was Jewish control over the land of Israel, that's one of the reasons given for the celebration of Hanukkah. So we see, it's not that there weren't negative things. There were some terrible, terrible situations that took place. But nevertheless, there was this feeling that if not for the reestablishment of the state, of the Jewish state, the situation would have become much worse. And I think that to a certain degree, that's the situation that we find ourselves. And more than that, I do not believe that the situation today is worse than it was in 1948. Yes, there are all kinds of things that are taking place in the world that the world didn't tolerate on a moral level, that the world did not tolerate, the secular world did not tolerate, did not accept at that time. And today, everything goes. But that would have happened anyway. Minhag HaYehudim, Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid says, Minhag HaYehudim, afilu hatov shebahem, keminhag hagoyim asher b'sochem hen yoshvin. There is an influence. The world has an influence upon us. It's not this establishment of the state of Israel that causes an increase in immorality. It is the world that is causing an increase in immorality. You can point to the gay parades that take place in Yerushalayim. It's terrible. And we have to fight it. But it's not because you have to be off your mind to believe that the reason there are gay parades When I speak about gay parades, it's not the parades. It's the style of life that became acceptable. It's not because of the establishment of the state of Israel. It's because this is what's going on in the whole world. You think our religious communities here in the United States isn't affected by the same thing? Torah sometimes talks about the Jewish people being an am ksheyoref, a stiff-necked people. What's the significance of being a stiff-necked people? Someone has a stiff neck, he can't turn his neck. He sees one way. He has a limited vision, area of vision. If you look at some of the things that are taking place in the state of Israel, and you'll only look over there and not look at the rest of the world, then somebody could suggest, hey, before 1948, morality was on a higher level for the Jewish people than it is now. But that's because you limit your vision. But if you look at the rest of the world, the state of Israel is no worse than the rest of the world. It's not the state of Israel that brought about the lack of morality. And if I could say, we see these things happening with the children of the from communities also. And the question we have to raise is, maybe, and I'm not saying it is a fact, we are not educating our children in a manner to counteract the influence of the world. Maybe statements by rabbis, both on the left and on the right, somehow play a role that allows people within the community to be affected by the trends of the time. So, and my father always used to mention that when you take a look at the Haftorah, of Mitzorah, so the halach, that time, the Yisrael, the Jewish people were divided into two nations, Yehuda and Yisrael, and Yisrael was under attack from Aram, and the city Shomron, and the city was encircled, and there was no food in the city, and people were starving, and whatever little food that was not of real value was being sold at very high prices, and people were dying of starvation. and people in of thirst. And the Navi told them that there will be a miracle. And at that time, there were 4 Mitzrayim, 4 people who were affected with saras. What saras is a discussion. And because they had saras, as we learn in the Sedras of this week, they had to stay outside the city walls. And they too, of course, were starving. And they made the decision. We'll go to the camp of the enemy, of Aram, because we have no choice. If they kill us, they kill us. If they give us food, we'll survive. And they went into the camp of Aram, and they found that the army camp of Aram that surrounded the city was completely empty. The soldiers of Aram, who had the city in the grasp of their hands, heard noises and sounds, and they thought that Israel made an alliance with other nations, and the members of those alliance have come now to defend the Jewish people. And they quickly ran away, leaving everything, the food and everything. And the 4 Mitzrayim, and in those days, having tsaras, whatever tsaras was identified with a person who was a sinner. And who were the Arba Mitzrayim? Chazal tell us the Arba Mitzrayim were Gehazi Uvanav, and Gehazi, who was someone who was associated initially with Elisha, but actually worked very much against him. And he's used as a symbol of a great sinner. And he, together with his 3 sons, because of the way they acted, were affected with saras. After partaking of the food, it dawned on them, maybe we should tell the people of the city, and perhaps there's a lesson here, that in times of trouble, people who are not motivated by that which is proper and good come to help us, help. And they went and they told the people of the city. And initially, the king and the officers thought that perhaps this is a trick. And the people of Aram left in order that the Jews should come out of the walls of the city, and then they'll attack them. But realizing that they had no choice, it was a question, even if that had been the case, of dying within the walls or outside the walls. They decided to go, and there was a great salvation. There was food, and the enemy was gone. And there was a great miracle. And who brought that miracle? Of course, it was HaKadosh Baruch Hu who brought that miracle. But who was the one that informed the Jewish people that they could come out and eat? It was Gei Chesed sinners. We see that there could be miracles that take place through the aid of those who are not committed to Torah, those who are anti-Torah. And I want to just mention something that I've said before in Parsha Shalach. I'll come back to this. In Parsha Shalach, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the first psukim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe, Shlach l'cha nashim, send out for you people who will go over the land, use the English word of spy the land. And then the Meraglim come back and they give a report how the Jewish people will not survive an attack on the land of Canaan, and the Jewish people rebel. And because of that, they have to go be in the Midbar, in the desert, for 40 years before they can enter the land of Israel. That whole generation dies out before they can enter the land of Eretz Yisrael. And in Chumash Dvarim, when Moshe Rabbeinu was looking back, perhaps on the last day of his life, but certainly toward the end of his life, he tells over about the incident. And when he tells over about the incident, he says, you came to me, you, the Jewish people, came to me. And you suggest that we should send out spies. And that idea found favor in my eyes. And we sent out spies, and then the spies misled us and everything that happened. But there's a difference. In Shalach, when the Torah is telling us about the incident as it happened, in terms of the simple reading, there are all kinds of drashos. But Shlach l'cha nashim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God, tells Moshe Rabbeinu, send out spies. It's almost like it's a mitzvah to send out spies when you read the pasuk. Vaydaber Hashem Moshe leimar shlach l'cha nashim v'yasuras eretz Canaan asher ani nosen l'nei Yisrael ish echad l'matei avasav tishlachu kol nasi behem vayishlach osa Moshe b'midbar paran al pi Hashem kulam anashim rashi b'nei Yisrael heima. So, but the simple reading is Moshe was complying with a command of God, with a mitzvah. And in Dvarim, no, you came to me, and I thought it was a good idea, and I sent it. And Chazal, our sages already asked that question. They say, Shlach l'cha, send out for you. If you choose to send, God gave him permission. He allowed him to do it. Figuratively, God said to himself, it's a mistake. But if you choose to do it, do it. So the question is, why is it? But the simple pshat is not that way. The simple pshat, I'm not chas v'shalom disagreeing with what Chazal say. The simple reading it, why is the Torah not tell us in Parsha Shalach what really happened? But I think the Torah wants us to be part, in a sense, to put us in that situation, to experience what the Jewish people were experiencing at the time that the Meraglim, that the spies went out. Sometimes there are trends of time. And sometimes when we don't think independently and we just become part of the herd, if I could use that word, and we don't think as individuals, you could call it a mob perspective. When you have a mob and they break windows, many of those people as individuals would never do that. But when they seize the thing as individuals and they let the trend of the people and of the time dictate to them what to do, they become part of that group also. And in Pasha Shlach, the Torah wants us to experience what the Jewish people experienced at that time. They formed the mob. They became part of the group. But in Dvarim, we're looking back. And when we look back, we see an altogether different story. And in 1948, when you saw that the leaders of the Zionist movement were not Torah-oriented and anti-Torah-oriented, and you were only looking at what was happening at that moment, and you ignored what happened a few years before, you perhaps could understand why some of the religious leaders were opposed to the establishment of the state. They had something to point to. But the problem is, to a certain degree, they were somewhat stiff-necked. They were focusing just on what they saw at that moment, almost forgetting what happened before, and perhaps not realizing, well, we can't blame anybody for not realizing the future, because we are not Nevi'im, we are not prophets. But if you remember the past properly, I always mention Schor Yemo Solam, Shninu B'nos Dor V'Dor. Some of the Mefarshim say that there's a mitzvah to learn history. It doesn't mean to memorize dates, but to see the trend of history, to see how history repeats itself. You would understand that we couldn't rely on the Arab rulers. But when you're stiff-necked and you only see one thing, then you can make a wrong decision. And I think that to a certain degree, this is what happened. This is what but let's look back. Let's take the approach of Chumash Dvarim. Yes, I mentioned there's immorality now that goes on in Israel that perhaps did not go on at that time. But that's a universal thing. And perhaps we have to make some changes in our educational system. Perhaps there are certain fellas, certain students in yeshivas, certain girls in the girls' schools, in the seminaries, that need a different approach. Maybe one approach for everybody is not good. Maybe each person is different. Maybe we have to teach people who will come in contact with society how to overcome the influence of society, and not just to assume that they won't come in contact with society. Maybe we have to understand that each child is different. And what might be the approach for one child is not the approach for another child. And what is the approach for children in one community might not necessarily be the approach for children of another community. And even within one family, there might be a need to have different systems of education for different children. So we look back, but look how Torah is flourishing in Eretz Yisrael. And even the Torah that's flourishing in America to a large degree, it's only because of Eretz Yisrael that it's flourishing. Do you think that if the Arab countries were in control of Eretz Yisrael, these Arabs that kill each other, that they would permit the yeshivas to continue in Torah learning? Obviously not. But we have to have the attitude that sometimes the shliach, and he might not even, that person might not even recognize that he's a shliach. It's brought down that the trains, I think it's brought down the name of the Brisker Rav, that the trains that the communist government made, or the Tsarist government made, to take Jews to Siberia, those were the trains that the yeshiva boys in Europe used to escape the Nazis in World War II. The communist government who made these trains, did they do it for the yeshiva boys? As the Brisker Rav explains the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, no, they didn't do it for the yeshiva boys. But it was done. And it was through their work. Yom Haatzmaut is not Ben Gurion's birthday. Yom Haatzmaut is not a celebration, it cannot be a celebration about the leaders of the Zionist movement, even though they accomplished, and to a large degree, as opposed to the situation in Russia, they meant what they thought was good for the Jewish people, perhaps. But this is what we have to, question that we have to face on Yom Haatzmaut. When we look back at the state of Israel, we see the miracle today is greater than it was then. We take for granted. That's why we don't realize. But if not for the Israeli army that was at the borders, that was fighting, the students in all the yeshivas would have been wiped out, like in 1929 in Hebron. The Jewish people in the whole state of Israel would be wiped out. And we do have to show Hakaras Hatov to the soldiers. When someone gives money to a yeshiva, regardless of his religious commitment, his religious devotion, he becomes a guest of honor. And when these people give their lives to protect us, to protect the Jewish, the yeshiva students, to protect all the Jews in Eretz Yisrael, what do they get when they walk into a frum neighborhood? If we want them to appreciate what the learning does for the state of Israel, there's no doubt about it. We have to show our appreciation to them also. And so when we look back, but it's not Ben Gurion. It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Just like HaKadosh Baruch Hu used the Arba Mitzrayim. The problem with those, I'm not telling anybody what to do. I don't tell people celebrate Yom Haatzmaut. I don't tell people not to celebrate Yom Haatzmaut. I don't tell people to say Hallel. I don't tell people not to say Hallel. Although I would suggest that they not make a bracha if they do say Hallel. But recognize that the establishment of the state was sof ma'aseh b'machshavat tchila of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Just look back. Look what has happened in all these years just among the Arabs themselves. You have to be really stupid. And it's not a natural stupidity. It's a stupidity that people arouse within themselves. It's being stiff-necked. They focus on one thing instead of looking at the whole panorama. We have to recognize that it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu that gave the state of Israel, not only because of the situation that the Jewish people found themselves in 1949 with the DP camps and the suffering of World War II and all that, but also because of the future that we live in, the future that allows yeshivas to flourish in Eretz Israel. And I know now there is problems because of the draft, not the draft, without getting into the shaila of the draft and not the draft. But I would suggest that they would have a lot easier time, the yeshiva boys, with the issue of the draft, if they would recognize and they would be makir tov to those who are sacrificing their lives on their behalf. Remember, in 1929, the boys in Hebron learned as hard as the boys in yeshivas in Eretz Israel today, and they were massacred. And we know that the Jews at Hebron at that time, even though they were offered guards, they refused the guards. We have to.
There would be 1929.
I meant what did I say?
1949.
Okay, I'm sorry. 1929. Okay, 1929. We have to realize that if we want them to recognize what the yeshiva boys do on behalf of the Jewish people with their tefillas, with their learning on behalf of the state of Israel, we have to go part way and recognize and have hakaras hatov for their sacrificing their lives on our behalf. Yom Haatzmaut is not a celebration of Ben Gurion's birthday or anybody else's or any individual. If we are to celebrate it, it has to be celebrated as giving Shabach v'hodat HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for giving the Jewish people the ability to survive in spite of all the anti-Semitism that is taking place in the world today.
Thank you, Ramosha. Any questions in the chat, please? Okay, David Makowski said there is a Yom Haatzmaut Machzer, I believe, published by Koren, but I'm not certain about that, which is Hoshana Rabbah davening, a full Torah reading with Torah, and an Alanisim in the Shemona Esrei.
All right, I don't know that all that is necessary.
So he wants to know if the Machzer can be used.
Huh?
He wants to know if the Machzer can be used.
Let me put it this way.
Thank you, David, for your question.
I certainly. Well, it's Thursday, but I think you should use the Kriyas Torah of the day. So if you're celebrating on Thursday, you should use the Kriyas Torah of the day. Tazria, Parshas Tazria. You could celebrate it. My feeling is, if you say Hallel, you say Hallel, preferably without a bracha. If you don't say Hallel, you could use appropriate prakim and tehillim that speak about Yerushalayim, about Eretz Yisrael. You could have a Sudas Hodah, a meal that gives thanks to Hakadosh Baruch Hu, and you could talk actually. My father on Yom Yerushalayim, the way he celebrated Yom Yerushalayim was that he would give a special share on Yerushalayim, the Kitchel Shaita, the Kitchel Asadlavo, all kinds of issues that centered around Yerushalayim. And that's for people who are B'nai Torah, who are able to do that. It wouldn't be so bad to talk about Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, about the mitzvah of conquering Eretz Yisrael. I don't know that we have to imitate. I don't know that you have to make it do more than we do on Purim and Hanukkah. You know, I one time my uncle said about some of the. He saw one of the that they were saying parts of L'chadodi or something in Yom Haatzmaut. He said, "How could people who learn Torah act in such a foolish manner?" In other words, we have to give Shevach v'Hodah, but we have to understand it's Yom Haatzmaut. It's not Pesach.
Okay. Okay, I was asked if the shul is having a Suda on Thursday. I believe that was probably addressed to Rabbi Lazovsky, so I don't know the answer to that. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. If there are no more questions, we will conclude the shir. Thank you again, Moshe, and appreciate everyone for attending.
Okay.
Second. Record. 1 second. 1 second.
One second. I've got to get out of it. I don't know.
So let me get rid of this. Host. Record.
I don't know how to.
Oh, no.
I'll tell you, if you're able to get out first, though, I'll be able.
Okay. Now it's interesting. I don't think I can press the stop recording button. So
Okay.
Leave the share.
Okay. Okay. Fine.